And good evening. Welcome to the Mayor and City Council workshop for the month of December. We'll begin with our pledge to the flag, and I'll ask Councilman Fuller to lead that pledge.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Hand is excused for the evening. He is at home fighting a cold, I believe. Other than that, all council members are present and accounted for. Let the records reflect. We'll begin with our review of the minutes of the November 3rd and November 8th regular meetings, and I'll ask the council if they have any changes to make to these minutes as presented this evening. All right. Hearing none, I'm going to commend the city clerk for the November 8th meeting and everything that surrounded that meeting. Very nice job getting that on paper. I'm sure you never want to watch that video ever again. All right, those will be up for your approval on Monday evening. Following that, we have a presentation from our city engineer, Brian Lubenow, giving us an update on our sewer compliance. So with that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Lubenow. Brian?
Thank you. Last time I was here was back at the September workshop. So this is an update. This is kind of what we've progressed since then. And again, another reminder of where we're headed with our compliance at the wastewater plant. As I said last time, this is kind of a summary of the work that's been going on and the ongoing meetings between myself, Kevin, Department of Public Works Director, Jim, and Jay. And we try to meet roughly monthly to go over these items and track our progress. So just first as a reminder, kind of what we're talking about, I'll be more brief on this background than I was last time. But it's stemming from the compliance related issues are stemming from the issues at the wastewater treatment plant. And as a little background, this plant was upgraded in 2016 for ENR, that's Enhanced Nutrient Removal criteria. And that was under a consent agreement with MDE. The plant, really I'd say since then, has struggled with meeting total nitrogen and total phosphorus limits. And that's really driven by the wet weather events. So when the flows are up to the plant, it results in higher loads of nitrogen and phosphorus leaving the plant. And as you know from, I'm sure what you've seen in the news and so forth, bay restoration, driving those nutrients down is critical to the health of the Chesapeake Bay. So like I said, it's wet weather that causes those. So if you think of flows that are often around 500,000 gallons a day in the system, they can go up to 1 million gallons a day, which is the average, to over 7 million gallons a day. And there is a dilution that takes place when that happens. So if you think of 0.4, or say 0.4 being a low flow, if it doubles to 0.8 mgd, the concentration coming into the plant is roughly half. But the problem is what leaves the plant is not cut in half. The plant can't treat to such low levels. So the end result of that is that you're discharging more load, more pounds of nitrogen, of phosphorus during those wet weather events than you would under normal conditions, or than you would if the sewers collection system was tighter and didn't allow all that rainwater into the system. So again, the areas we're focusing on the compliance is in two places. One is at the plant, and then the other, probably more primary one, at least initially, is in the collection system, where we're focusing on the terracotta pipes that are more prone to allowing that inflow and infiltration into the system. So we've continued to work with MDE on this. Going back a little ways, back to August, we had a conference call with MDE, and we laid out our plan, and they requested that we submit a formal written compliance plan, and that was submitted in September. I think that was actually just before we had spoke last time. We had submitted that compliance plan. And we haven't really heard back from them at all. There's been really no communication from them at all, but we continue to chip away at that plan and progress on the items as we said we would. So one of those items was the submission of the 2020 wastewater capacity management plan that was submitted in November. That is later than what was required by the permit, although the requirement for submission of that was allowed to be delayed because of the pandemic. So there was an extension granted for that reason. So like I said, that was a good step to get that in November. And as we continue to move forward with MDE on this, the idea of another consent agreement is something that we should keep in the back of our minds, knowing that it may be a tool that MDE and the city can use to joint advantage in funding and in targeting improvements so that we can reach the goal to bring the plant back into compliance. But there's really been no formal discussions about anything regarding a consent agreement yet. I think it all kind of depends on how we do with progressing on this compliance plan that we gave them. So this is the summary that Jim and I came up with that relates to how we're approaching compliance at the plant. And I think it does a good job in summarizing what I just said. So the City of Taneytown completed upgrade of the Taneytown Wastewater Treatment Plant in 2016 to meet enhanced nutrient, that's ENR, standards under MDE's Bay Restoration Fund program. Since startup of the upgraded wastewater treatment plant, the city has struggled to comply with certain conditions of their NPDES permit. So that's the permit that controls what the plant is allowed to discharge into the Piney Creek. Most notably, maximum annual loading rate, so that's the pounds that were allowed in a given year for nitrogen and phosphorus. The city has been in communication with Maryland Department of the Environment since this time and has been proactively addressing this non-compliance. The enclosed plan, so that's what we gave them, details past, ongoing, and future initiatives to return the wastewater treatment plant to permit compliance. It includes, and this is kind of the way the rest of this presentation will be structured, it includes communication and planning tasks, as well as evaluations and improvements in the collection system and the wastewater treatment plant. So often when we're talking about our compliance plan, we focus on the communication and planning pieces, the collection system pieces, and the plant pieces. Those are kind of like our three buckets that we put our projects and tasks and initiatives in for discussion purposes. So first of all, I'll address progress to date on those planning and communication pieces. As I mentioned, we continue to have routine staff level meetings with myself, Jim, Kevin, and Jay. We have presentations such as these to the mayor and council, keep you folks up to date on what we're doing. The Carroll County Water and Sewer Master Plan has some recent activity with the upcoming spring amendment. So this plan is updated, is it twice a year, Jim? Okay, so in the fall and the spring, they have amendments. And our plan for the spring 2022 amendment is to identify I&I reduction projects and estimate flow reductions that we expect to get out of those projects. So at this point, we don't anticipate any changes to the plan with regard to plan development. It would just be updating the plan to reflect the projects the city intends to move forward with in the near future. And then every 3 years, that plan gets an overhaul. So it's beginning the process of that triennial water and sewer master plan update. So the county coordinates all that and works with the municipalities to get the data and to get their planning information to create the plan and to get it approved by MDE. So Jim has attended at least one or more meetings so far with the county.
So far.
Okay, just one, yeah. But ultimately, it will result in us providing flow and development projection data to them, as well as new project information that will result in a new master plan. Anything to add to that, Jim?
And the county is trying to incorporate a more data-driven component to that water and sewer master plan. So they're doing data gathering on usage figures from water billing from the various municipalities and public systems. So it may be a little bit of a shift with this next iteration of the plan. So kind of looking forward to that data-driven piece of it. It's will be a little challenging because we don't capture things in the same format that the county's looking for them, but we'll figure it out.
And then the final planning update I have for you is, as I mentioned, the wastewater capacity management plan was submitted for 2020 last month. And then as soon as we have the flow numbers for all of 2021, we'll be working on the 2021 plan, and that one will be submitted in the schedule that's in the permit, which is by the end of January of next year. And moving on into progress to date on within the collection system on reducing I&I. The Department of Public Works continues to progress on their sanitary system survey. They're at about 90% complete, including all of the known, I should say suspected terracotta lines. Most of what's left is new development areas that aren't expected to have, those should be tighter systems, PVC, that don't contribute any or much I&I into the system. And we also are focusing on refining the manhole locations in the GIS, the geographical information system, where all that information is being stored. I'll go into that in a bit more detail, but initially the locations of all the sewer manholes were gathered through cell phone GPS, which is not as accurate as other techniques. The flow monitoring study, which I'm sure I mentioned last time, that was conducted about a year and a half ago. The report was completed in this past month, and that was one of the key drivers in pieces of information that we're going to use to plan the rest of our I&I reduction program. One of the first components of that reduction program is the Meadowbrook Interceptor. So that's about 2,000 feet that runs from the low point of the Meadowbrook development through overland along a small stream to the York Street pump station, which is along 194, just kind of as you're going out north of the city. It was televised and cleaned about a year and a half ago, and the plan is to rehabilitate that line through sewer replacement and also with lining where possible. So the replacement piece of that is currently out to bid, with bids due in about a week and a half. So we'll have that bid package, or the recommendation to award at the January meeting, hopefully, with the idea of starting construction in February. We had our pre-bid meeting on that on December 1st.
You talked about the sewer system survey, including all suspected terracotta.
Yeah.
Was there any surprises, like there was terracotta where we were not expecting, or did it go as planned, I guess is the question. Were our suspicions correct? Were there a couple surprises in there?
Kevin would probably be better to answer that question, but I think generally speaking, it was about what we thought. I think if what I just brought up now is the sewer system map, and all the green is PVC or other, but mostly PVC, and the red is the terracotta.
Okay.
I think on the edges of the red is maybe where Department of Public Works wasn't so sure. So now we know, where those start and stop. But I think generally speaking, it was about what we thought.
Okay.
I will add that the fact that Baltimore Street was all lined prior to streetscape. And you can, kind of see that stretched all the way down, obviously through the city. Just reminded how huge of an effort, a significant project that was, especially in this effort of reducing I&I, because that's probably at the time it was, it was a pretty good percentage that now we don't have to worry about anymore.
Right.
So it's somewhat spread across the, if you imagine that Baltimore Street line red, it all would have been kind of connected, to the old portions of town for the most part. That's kind of the outlier of what makes it, all the remaining pieces kind of look scattered throughout.
So I believe I'm seeing the Meadowbrook Interceptor essentially going from the new O'Brien Bridge over to the York Street Pumping Station. Is that correct?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I don't know if you can, you can't see my cursor.
Can't see your cursor. Can everyone see where I'm talking about on there?
Do this, I think. There's a pointer.
There you go. That part right there.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a 12-inch terracotta line, about 2,000 feet from one extent to the other, right from near the bridge to near the pump station at Cranmaster's property.
And previously we discussed during that O'Brien Bridge project, we had replaced a portion.
Yeah, right by the
Around
bridge.
there.
And that's why
Okay.
this area became a priority, because that bridge project, we got lucky, I'll be honest. We replaced some pieces around the bridge just because we had to, because the bridge abutments were in the way. And the contractors noticed huge amounts of groundwater in the area when they were doing the construction. And as soon as those couple of sewer runs were replaced, the Department of Public Works reported, big reductions in flow into that pump station. While we don't anticipate having quite the same impact as we replace the rest of it, we do still expect that this to be a high priority area where we get a lot of a high gallons per foot by replacing and lining that section.
So do we have a total linear feet of terracotta in the city? Do we have that figure?
We do, and it's right around 21,000 feet.
Okay. So 4 miles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brian, I know that overall the terracotta piping is going to obviously adversely affect I&I, but the areas of the system where the terracotta pipe connects to the more modern piping, does that have any kind of appreciable negative effect on the piping surrounding it? Like, does it wear it faster? Does it adversely affect the functioning?
No, the terracotta, there are two-foot segments, so there's many more joints in there. So at each one of those joints, you have opportunity for leaking. Plus, it cracks longitudinally, often along the top or the bottom. But no, once it's where it connects to the PVC, it should be fine. I mean, the connecting pipe is fine.
Well, and I guess and I hope I was explaining myself clearly enough. It doesn't, what's coming through terracotta is not adversely, if the terracotta can't necessarily handle what it's dealing with, does that, when it, funnels it into the newer systems? I mean, that's what I was getting at.
Right, no, I understand what you're saying now.
Okay.
So yeah, I think if we think back to that September storm that I believe I referenced in a couple slides back, some of the overflows, they were not at a manhole that has terracotta in it. They were at a manhole just downstream of that. So it's, we have the upstream area where all the flow's getting in. Where you might have the problem of an overflow would be wherever the capacity of the line is somewhat restricted downstream of that. So that nothing's going to change with that restriction. It's just ideally you'll have a whole lot less flow getting there.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Sure. The next item I wanted to highlight that I mentioned earlier was this manhole location refinement that we're going through. And I really want to credit the city IT department, Dan and Jacob, for not only taking the data from the manhole surveys that the Department of Public Works was doing and proactively, finding a GIS system through shareware that wasn't costing the city any money to house all that data. But then through discussions with the group, realizing that some of the location data wasn't very accurate, and then going out and purchasing a relatively inexpensive piece of GPS survey quality equipment to verify the locations. So what you see in this figure, the white dots are locations of manholes from Department of Public Works cell phones as they walked around and did these surveys. And then the blue dots are the refinement based on this new equipment. They were able to quickly set up a base station, learn the equipment, and start going around and sort of testing the level of accuracy that we had. And in some cases, these manholes were off by 20, 30, 40 feet. Some applications, that's okay. Something like this, probably not. So yeah, again, I really credit those guys for going out there, figuring this out. And I think having this piece of equipment will benefit the city in many, many other ways, many of which we probably don't even know yet. But already, Dan's been trying to work with, I'm assuming Jim, on the verifying a property line along West Baltimore Street. I could see the Parks Department using that equipment. So really cool to think that high level of technology is now available at such an affordable rate that you guys could purchase. So that's awesome.
So this picture you're showing us, the manhole locations, those to the east of 194 are part of that Meadowbrook Interceptor, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So the Meadowbrook Interceptor project actually starts right about where my laser pointer is there. It doesn't go all the way to this manhole because this manhole is adjacent to an SHA culvert. And we were highly recommended by SHA not to touch it because as soon as we touch it, it becomes the city's problem. So we stopped just short of it. And the way that we'll deal with that is that last little bit will line as opposed to replace. So again, trenchless technology coming in. But yeah, so then the Meadowbrook Interceptor progresses along the Craymaster property here and then back to here and then across the railroad.
So I assume at the railroad tracks, we have to line that as well. We're not replacing that portion.
Yeah, the railroad tracks is ductile iron. So actually we could line it, but at this point, we don't plan. It's not terracotta. That's correct. Yep. But no, we're not digging it up. We're not replacing it. Yeah. So unfortunately, the manholes actually, as you can see in this figure, are in the railroad right of way. So we do have to get a permit, and that's one of the things that's lingering things in the bidding of the project that we're trying to work through is getting that permit and the conditions of that permit.
Do we expect that to delay the start of construction in February?
No.
Or are we having good conversations with them?
Good conversations, yeah,
Okay.
as of just a couple days ago. Yeah, so even though we likely won't have the permit, I know enough about the conditions that will be tied to the permit that we can give the contractors information that they can build into their bid and plan accordingly.
Great.
But I do expect to have, shouldn't hold up construction.
Okay.
My main concern was it going to hold up getting reliable bids. And it sounds like it's not going to.
Okay.
Then changing focus over to the wastewater treatment plant. When we spoke last time, I talked about an ongoing pilot project that we were working with. It's Century is the name of the manufacturer. It's a really exciting new technology that monitors biological activity and essentially converts it into a signal, an analog signal, so you can sort of get real-time information with how much the biology and the microbes in the wastewater are, how active they are, how much food there is for them to consume. So it's it was really, really interesting data. Especially, this was the first time they applied these types of sensors to the type of plant that the city has. So I think they learned a lot. I think we learned a lot more about the sensor. Unfortunately, I just don't think it was a good match as far as now, like actually the city paying for it and what the benefits would be to get out of it. I just don't think it really pays for itself. So ultimately, after extending their pilot period by many months, the sensors were removed about a week or so ago. So the pilot ended, but again, I think it was a really valuable project. And at some point in the line, I'm sure if Kevin felt like there was a use, they'd be happy to come back out and give it another try. We have a project ongoing that doesn't really directly relate to compliance, but it does relate to efficiencies at the plant. Micro C is a chemical that's used to drive down nitrogen, and currently the city gets it in totes. I can't remember off the top of my head the size of a tote, but it's maybe a 4-foot square box of this chemical, and instead if you have a tank of it, they can get delivered on a tanker truck. You can get the same material at, I don't know, 20%, 25% of the cost. So we have a project ongoing to construct a storage tank for that. Construction's ongoing. It's a little bit delayed, like everything with equipment and deliveries, but it's progressing, which is good. And then another project that you're aware of is the sludge dewatering upgrade. Again, that construction is unfortunately a bit delayed due to equipment delivery and delays like everyone is experiencing with all sorts of components and equipment.
Do we have any ETA on that?
The latest I heard is the actual piece of equipment is expected in, I'm going to say by now, I'm going to say more. I heard February, but I'm going to say March. The same for the building. It's a pre-engineered building.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say March.
You say equipment expected to us.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
this project was actually procured in 2 steps. One, the city procured the belt filter press.
Right.
And then the other is that you hired a contractor to build the building and to install the press and all the ancillary pieces, piping, pumps, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So the belt filter press would be delivered to the city under that first contract, probably around March. But the delays with the control panel associated with that are more like May or June.
Oh, so it will be here, but not
The mechanical
functional.
equipment will be here. And then, so that's what matters for the contractor. He can put it into place. He can start getting the building built around it, piping it in, but no, it certainly wouldn't be functional until summer.
Okay. In the meantime, and this may be a question for Kevin, not so much you, with our current belt filter press, how bad is it right now?
The last I heard, and that was probably about a month and a half ago, there was some new issue that you may be aware of, and I can't tell you what the details are, but again, they had a component fail.
Right.
It was down for a period of time. I suspect that it's running again, because I think I would have heard if it wasn't. But yeah, it continues to have
Major issues, right?
yeah, maintenance issues with a piece of equipment that I think dates back to the 70s. So
Or before, I think, right?
I think it's 70s.
Is it?
yeah.
So with these delays that we're experiencing with the bulk storage and with the watering, are these companies that we've slated to do these projects, they're not coming back to us and saying, well, we need more money now, are they? They're not asking for an increase of their, okay.
No, certainly not with the equipment itself. There have been some discussions with Conawago, who's the contractor to install it and build the building and all the ancillary parts. Not really having, not directly saying, oh, the cost of pipe went up, I need to be compensated for that. But there are some discussions we're having on certain pieces that they can't get that meet per spec, and is this okay instead? The one that comes to mind is the piping, I'm trying to remember now, I think it was to be PVC. They asked to use HDPE instead. they could install it. I know PVC pipe is one of the things that is
Getting short right
going,
now. Yeah.
crazy price increases. It's so much that, typically it would be much cheaper to do that than it would be to do ductile iron. They're getting closer and closer, which is hard to believe, but.
So in a situation like that where they would recommend something else other than what we had intended or planned for, how does that affect, or how does that impact the overall effectiveness of what we'd hoped for?
Yeah, so that's something that, like that, if I use that as an example, I got that request in. I have floated it around internally in our company to see what people think. I talked to another engineer that's in Kansas City that I know that we've been consulting with, I'd say, on this project, and he gave me an example where fused HDPE was used, and he gave me a couple things to look out for, things to require, and then I sent it to Kevin and Brian Rabb at the plant. What do you think? And including kind of the feedback that I got internally, and yeah, eventually, I think in that case there may have been a couple of a certain class that we required him to use of the pipe and the fittings. I think he wanted to transition from the HDPE to PVC underground at kind of like a vertical bend coming up into the building. And we said, no, like let's have that transition in the building as opposed. So that was like an example of, we said yes, but we have these conditions to go with it. So
And
we worked through it.
And they've been amenable to those conditions? too?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, they know that we could say, no, this is what we really want. So, it's trying to find a solution that works for everybody.
Thank you.
Great.
So those were the progress we made to date on those three big items on planning, collection system, and the plant. And then the next step, like I said, the Meadowbrook Interceptor replacement that's currently bidding with bids to be opened next Friday. We'll have our final addendum that gets issued this Friday, and then construction in the spring of next year. Will be, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but the 21,000 feet of terracotta, we made the decision to go ahead and have all of that televised, so cleaned and televised, so we can make informed decisions on what we want to fix, what we should fix first, what needs to be replaced versus what can be lined. So that televising contract, we're also opening bids for that next Friday. So once we have that, then we'll be able to really, once we have the results of that and we have all this piping televised and reviewed, then we'll be able to complete the planning and put together how this terracotta replacement lining program looks, how many contracts it gets broken into, what areas we replace, how long of a program is it? Is it something you do? Do you have the funds to do it all in a year? Does it become 20 years? We have another client that did hundreds of thousands of feet over, I think it was a 9-year program. And it was all laid out in year 0 as these are the areas we're going to do, and they just chipped away at it. So that's a key next step that'll be happening along with all of your federal stimulus money that you have and where can that be applied, all important parts of the decision process. And then we'll move ahead with the first phase of that CIPP lining program. Continue the 2 of the last 4 items there are continuing the construction and completing the construction of the storage tank as well as the dewatering upgrade. And then 2 other items at the plant that I haven't mentioned yet. One is coagulant is another chemical that's currently used ferric chloride at your plant. Looking to see, is there a different dose of that that's more cost effective or more effective at reducing phosphorus? Or is there another similar chemical that's better? So some lab testing and some jar testing of that is planned for next year. And then finally, the last item is a redundancy evaluation. I know there's been some instances where pieces of equipment, a pump or a valve has gone down, and it's, again, getting back to these delays and getting parts and equipment. It takes weeks or months to get something in hand. The idea there is a pretty thorough review of all of the spare parts and contingency plans at the plant, and decisions about where it makes sense to have more spare parts on hand and maybe where it doesn't make sense. So that's that last piece, because when you have a piece of equipment that's down, that's a lot of what drives those non-compliance issues. Is if you're trying to meet a very tight limit, and all of a sudden you have a critical piece of equipment down for not just a day, but a month while you're waiting for a part, and you're only can be half as effective, it really, really hurts your chances of becoming compliant for the year. So that's about it for the next step. So yeah, all of those items that I just went over there, those are all kind of part of that compliance plan that we submitted to MDE, and that the staff reviews on a monthly basis as we continue to work towards getting the plant back into compliance. So, any other questions?
All right, I know we asked some questions during the presentation, but I'll open up to the council. Do you have any additional questions? Okay. Thank you. It was very thorough, and I think we're
Great.
understanding where you are. So thank
Good.
you for making the trip. And
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
all right. Next, I will ask members of the council if they have any conflicts of interest on any agenda items this evening.
No, sir.
No, sir. All right. With that, we will open it up for public comment to anything not on the agenda this evening. Would anyone from the public wish to make a comment at this time? All right. Hearing nothing, we shall move on. Up for adoption on Monday evening will be Resolution 2021-22. This is the water allocation for the month of December, part of our monthly water allocations. Any questions or concerns from the council regarding that resolution? All right. Hearing none, that will be up for your adoption on Monday. Next up, Mr. Weeprick, do you have a report for us as city manager?
Sure do. Just a few updates on the capital improvement program. That's kind of tied into a lot of what Brian talked about this evening, as well as our potential ARPA funding, or our ARPA funding, not potential. And so far, we've, as far as the ARPA funding goes, we've identified about $4.3 million worth of projects that are all water, sewer, and stormwater. So kind of focusing on the sewer and some of that I&I reduction that Brian talked about. We've talked about doing essentially mini streetscape on Roberts Mill Road for a number of years now. And, we've budgeted for it this year, and we can use ARPA funds for the water, stormwater, and sewer portion of that. So instead of all of that coming from fund balance, now only the street portion that's not attributable to repairs related to the other infrastructure will have to come from HUR money, or the street balance. But we've also decided during our extreme rain events this fall, when we had manholes surcharging in East Baltimore Street, realized that addressing Roberts Mill Road was only going to take care of part of the problem, because that sewer line then goes down Broad Street to the manholes that during heavy rains have overflowed. So one of the criteria we used in prioritizing projects was the compliance and avoiding penalties and basically permit violations. So we decided to include Broad Street as like a second phase of the Roberts Mill Road project, and that will be that's in the CDM Smith proposal that's going to be on the agenda later this evening. So that's another one of the projects that we've added recently. But again, we've been trying to focus on things that are going to reduce our flow at the treatment plant, help us regain compliance, save us money by, of course, processing less rainwater as opposed to sewage. And that's really the direction we've been taking with most of the ARPA money. And we've been looking at it really at a compliance-driven, that's been really the priority for it. So not a whole lot more on that. Did want to just give you a quick update on Trevanian Terrace. Blasting has paused for the last couple days. We have had one homeowner complaint out there, which has been pushed over to the county. I'm still waiting for a response on that one. But all in all, it's been going smoothly, and blasting is going to resume out there tomorrow, or at least that is the plan, weather permitting. They do expect to have, they had to pause because they needed to do more excavation, clear some of the overburden out so that they could continue to blast deeper. But that's going to be resuming, so, and again, hopefully it stays as quiet as it has been. Lastly, on the Meadowbrook Interceptor, again, Brian touched on that, and I did want to just clarify that what's out to bid right now is for the reconstructed portion, the portion that's going to be replaced, dug up and replaced. The portion that's going to be lined will be part of a lining effort that will follow that televising and cleaning of all the terracotta lines. So that will be a different type of contractor that will be bidding on that. So we've kind of broken that into replacement, and then the relining of the rest of it will come later. And we did have a pre-bid meeting on the 1st. We had 4 contractors attend, and it was clear that they had all really looked at the plans closely. They asked some good questions that have been answered in the first addendum, and so hopefully we'll have 4 bids come in for that one next week. So, and let's see. I can pause for a minute until we get to department reports, but I do have a couple things to just add on to other departments as well.
All right, let's start with, are there any questions on the city manager's report?
I have a couple of questions about the ARPA, but I guess I should wait for the Roberts Mill and Broad Street design discussion later, and I think it would probably be more appropriate to wait for that.
Is it regarding ARPA in use for that or other ARPA things?
ARPA in use for it.
Okay, very good. We'll wait on that then.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely. All right, Mr. Weeper, go ahead and continue with departmental.
Okay, sure. Just wanted to add something to Parks and Rec. We've talked about demolishing the farmhouse at Festival Park, and we were having some trouble getting a figure for the well closure. We reached out to a different contractor. They were very responsive, and the well's already closed. So they were very quick with the turnaround on that, and it was well within our budgeted amount.
Well within.
Oh, sorry.
That was great.
If only I had intended that. And the other thing, unfortunately heard this afternoon, well 16, the pump is down at the moment. That's one of our Carroll Vista wells. And had an electrician on site, found some damage in the controls, replaced some pieces, and unfortunately that did not do the trick. So tomorrow the pump is going to be pulled for inspection. So I'm sure by Monday night I'll have more of an update on that, but kind of fingers crossed that it's not something major with the pump. But that just came up this afternoon, so I wanted to give you a heads up.
Okay.
And that's it.
Any questions from council on departmental reports? I do want to highlight to the council in the IT report regarding some of the email scams that are becoming more prevalent. I believe you saw an email from Jacob regarding this. Please be extra cautious on your emails. Don't click on anything that you don't know exactly what it is, and make sure you look where it's going to take you before you click on it, okay? If you have any questions, call Dan or Jacob, and they can help you out with that. Better safe than sorry. And if you get emails from the fake Mayor Bradley Wantz, forward them to Dan Dennis. Mr. Gullo is not with us this evening, so there's not a legal report. In old business, I've asked to include the community village discussion, and my intention is to keep this in old business just to remind us each month that this is something I really think we need to address. With that discussion, has everyone had a chance to read through Community Village? If not, it's okay, I understand.
I've gotten some of it, but I think, Clara, can I get a, I hate to do it, a printed copy?
Yeah.
I'm struggling to get this thing to stay.
If you need a printed copy of Community Village, be happy to give it to you. I'm toying with the thought of actually planning a retreat in January for Community Village and ARPA. Two things that we can all kind of get together and hash it out at the same time. I'll know more on Monday if we're going to pull the trigger on that. But for tonight, I just wanted to be in front of you. Community Village, were there any initial concerns that you wanted to discuss with it so that we can go home and, as we read, think about them? I think Mayor Pro Tem Vigliotti might have some thoughts.
I have a few thoughts, but I guess, I mean, for the sake of brevity this evening and for the sake of, intensifying the course of the discussion as we move forward, especially with the idea that there might be a retreat about it, I guess maybe it probably would be proper to wait on the majority of this. I guess maybe what I would like going forward, and I've read through this. I've read through this a couple years ago. I sat, most of us sat through everything that went on with Meads Crossing, and so I guess, are there any other documents or pieces of information that we have that we can also receive that would be pertinent to the discussion?
Would it be appropriate to make accessible to council some of the documents from Meads Crossing and Carroll Vista, particularly their agreements? Doris, thank you. Would that shed any light on that?
Well, maybe let me, if I could narrow my point a little bit more. I mean, that certainly would be helpful given, to be able to see how in practice this applies. But I guess maybe one of the things that I had a general sort of confusion about going through this, and maybe confusion is not the right word, but difficulty discerning, are the things which truly distinguish a community village from any other residential development. And what I mean by that is when I went through this, I noticed that, and I'll run through a brief list here of certain things, right? This talks about unit density, lot sizes, building heights, number of dwellings in a unit, building coverage, yards, build to lines, initial phasing. I have a list that goes on. All these different things can be modified in one way or another. And going through this, there were only 3 specific things I saw which do not have, can be modified by a vote of this board or the council or whatever. One of them is only partially the case, is that, landscaping is supposed to be a distinguishing feature of a community village, but even under that particular section, it talks about how this can be modified based on planning or whatever the case is, or preparing for the construction. But the only other 2 items I saw in here that did not have any recourse were no swimming pools and no sheds. And obviously, we dealt with the issue of sheds in the last couple of months, but so beyond no swimming pools and no sheds, and I think I did see something else in there about a community village is supposed to take into account the aesthetic views surrounding the community village, but even that is open to modification given circumstances. So I guess what I'm looking for is something concrete that specifically says, this is what a community village is, this is what the intent is, these are all of the items that are part and component of the community village.
I think you're on the right path.
Okay.
But that's part of the problem is that we don't really have that.
Okay.
Right, and I
All
think
right.
you've hit the nail on the head, is it's been left so flexible that there's no consistency whatsoever in what a community village is or could be in the city. So I think you've noticed a lot of the problem, is that there's nothing in there that says, and I'm sure when Mr. Weeprick was the zoning administrator, that generally is a very black and white thing. Community village, I feel, is a very gray thing because there's so much flux. Does that sound right to you?
With regard to Meads Crossing, I think it was more about the process than the actual community village ordinance. Mead's Crossing did start out adhering to the community village design aesthetic and much of the uh, table of area and bulk and so on. When the housing market tanked and things started to recover and the developer was having trouble finding a builder who was interested in delivering that product, is when things started to kind of unravel. And we essentially used the DARA to overrule many of the design aesthetic components of Community Village. So we kind of used the DARA to make a lot of exceptions for Mead's Crossing. I suppose, you know, we were hungry for the development and we wanted to make sure that it moved forward, and we felt, you know, I'm sure council felt at the time it was in the city's best interest to make those concessions to ensure that the project was built.
Right.
So that's, I think it might be helpful for a quick visual perhaps to go back and look at some of the earlier Mead's concept drawings or layout plans to see what it looked like originally as a community village,
Right.
as compared to what is on the ground today. I think that might be, that might paint a pretty good picture for everyone.
I think it's a very good point. And I don't want this talk, because we talk about these community villages, I don't want it to sound like developers are evil and taking advantage of us. There are parts of community village I don't think the city is truly interested in. The rear-loaded lots, I don't think are beneficial to the city. We're simply adding pavement to be plowed. I don't think that's in our best interest. So I don't want you all to think that I'm doing this because developers have screwed us. I don't think that's the case. It's just there are things that we don't believe are appropriate. Continue, Mr. Weeper.
Sure. No, I think that's a very good summary.
And
And
that's
there may
actually an
be-
interesting point. I'm sorry, that's actually another interesting point. And again, one of the many things I noticed is that, you know, somewhere in there it says, you know, we're trying to minimize the number of roads and paved surfaces in a community village, except under this condition and that condition and this modification. So,
Right.
you know, then that makes perfect sense.
Yep. And certainly with Community Village, there are a lot of aspects that are, while any development is somewhat site-driven based on the environmental features, topography, et cetera, you know, as to where you're going to be able to build and where you pretty much are going to have to leave something as open space. I think Community Village focuses on more of an aesthetic, more of a visual that you know, they're trying to preserve and enhance, you know, the best features of the property, where maybe a conventional developer or a development might say, oh, this is where I'm going to put the biggest lots and the most expensive homes because it's got the best view. Right. Community Village would try to preserve that best view for the community at large and not for, you know, the select few premium lots.
Who can afford it, right?
And so it's just a different approach on how things are going to look.
And along those same lines, we talk about green space and encouraging the green space, things like that. What I want to make sure of is that I understand there are parts of a property that they cannot develop because of geographic features. But I want to make sure that if that's green space intended to come to the city, it's actually usable in some way, shape, or form. So giving someone credit for green space that can't be used for anything except mowing, and even then it's a pain, is it truly a benefit to that community or the community at large? Things I think we need to consider.
And I think if I could maybe give a quick suggestion, you might want to take a look while you're reviewing Community Village at the Carroll County Cluster Ordinance. So some of the same preservation of open space and preserving the number of units that might be built on a parcel, but grouping them together on a smaller individual lots than would typically be permitted in a district. If you are more interested in minimizing infrastructure, you know, roads, water, sewer, for the number of dwellings that are going to be constructed, that might be an alternative way to achieve that. and the county does have a clustering ordinance. It's in Chapter 155, Section 95 of the county code that you can access through the county website. There are some similarities to what Community Village seeks to achieve as well. So that might be something to talk about when we have, a little more detailed, a little more in-depth discussion on Community Village.
Right. I'll ask that you email a link to that to the council.
Will do.
Just as a reminder to them and where to find it. Okay, so I think everyone with that seems pretty clear on the direction we're hoping to go. If you need a printed copy of Community Village, Claire will make sure you get one.
I think I'll need another copy, Claire. Thank you.
And another stack of sticky notes now.
You're just a tree killer. is all. And then also, Ms. Weeperk will send you a link to the county cluster ordinance as well. Research it, ask questions. I believe Mr. Weeperk is probably the most knowledgeable in the city right now. Mr. Hale's probably getting closer and closer.
He's reading up on it.
He's reading up. So reach out to them, reach out to each other, bounce ideas off. Don't be islands on this. But I definitely want everyone to come up with some ideas of how they think this can better benefit the city of Taneytown. Okay?
Can I bring up one more point, and maybe it's a little ironic even, I don't know. So reading through this, again, there's a section about garages, whether they could be attached or detached and under what circumstances. And I've promised I'm not trying to launch a discussion about this, but I guess the question for a detached garage in a community village, what is the real difference between a very large shed and a garage? Like, there's really no specificity in here between what counts as a detached garage and just a very, very large shed that someone could put a car in and call a garage. Or vice versa, someone who uses a garage that's detached like a shed. So,
I would, and we have not seen that come to fruition with Community Village thus far.
Thanks for bringing it up.
you're welcome, you're welcome.
But I would imagine that the detached garage would be, as with the homes themselves, they would be approved, the design, the pattern book, so to speak, would be approved by the Planning Commission. In the case of a detached garage, that would probably be mated to a specific dwelling type that, this garage goes with this model house. So it would be kind of a package deal that will all be put up by the builder and approved by the Planning Commission, where when you get into individual storage sheds, the Planning Commission generally has no say in where they're going to go, what they're going to look like, what materials they'll be, anything like that. And, generally speaking, it's really up to the homeowner or their HOA, if they live in a community that has an association, to regulate those.
Right.
But there's, you could have a traditional, single gable roofed house and put up a Dutch barn shed that doesn't really necessarily complement the house, and there's no control over that. So I think Community Village would exercise a little control on the garages.
That makes sense, that makes sense. Again, it was one of those interesting and slightly confusing things because there really was no clear specificity about certain elements of garages and what did or didn't count or for that. Because I think, Councilman Haynes, you brought up that point a couple months ago that, what's to distinguish a shed from a very large, very large shed from a garage.
I'll take your word on that. I don't remember. Your memory's as good as mine anymore, Councilman Haynes. All right, with that, we're going to move on. I ask you just to do some homework, do some learning, and be prepared. And I'll let you know Monday if we decide to retreat this. Moving into our new business, we have the monthly financial report. I'll ask council if they have any questions or concerns concerning that report. All right, hearing none, that'll be up for your approval Monday evening, and I'm going to ask you the same of the accounts payables as it's presented to you. All right, hearing no discussion, again, that'll be up for your approval on Monday. Number 3, you probably noticed in your packet, you have nothing talking about this, and here's the reason why. The award of contract for Memorial Park tennis courts and basketball court, we ran into a problem. We opened the bids on Friday, and we received 2 bids, grossly different amounts, and both were considered incomplete. They're both missing items that were required. So what I'm going to ask of you on Monday is to choose one of 2 things. Either we direct staff to go back to both bidders and ask them to submit the missing information, or we rebid it entirely. So think about that prior to Monday, and I'll ask for a consensus from the council on which way they wish to proceed. But it was factual that both bids were missing required information. All right. Number 4, this is the CDM Smith rate schedule for 2022. It's been presented to you in your packet. I believe there is a small increase, if I'm not mistaken, and that pricing is laid out for the hourly rates as well as other costs that may come up as a part of their duties on behalf of the city. Any questions on these rates? And before we do that, let me ask, are you comfortable entertaining questions, or is this outside of your realm?
Oh, no, absolutely. I'm comfortable entertaining questions.
Okay, I didn't know if it was departmentalized enough that,
No,
perfect.
No, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Excellent. With that, I'll ask the council, do you have any questions or concerns regarding the rates being presented to keep CDM Smith as our primary engineer? I'll ask Mr. Weeprick, anything from staff? Are we satisfied? Are we concerned?
We are very satisfied.
We are very satisfied. I'll say personally, and not to sway the council's decision, I personally am very satisfied with the work from CDM Smith and Brian Lubenow especially.
Thank you.
I believe he is extremely attentive to the city. I know there was concern years ago when kind of companies got together if we would receive the same attention. I think we very much are. So,
Happy to hear it. Thank you.
absolutely. I guess along with that, there's the contract that we'll sign accordingly. So that'll be up for your approval on Monday evening as well. Lastly, under new business, yet again, CDM Smith, the Roberts Mill Road Broad Street Reconstruction Design and Bidding Services Proposal. I'm going to throw this to Mr. Weeprick to start us off, if you want to guide us through.
So this pretty much is what it takes, what's going to take to finish development of that project, to develop the construction drawings and get us ready to bid, and also to help us through the bid process. So right now, I suppose you could say that the project has been planned, but not fully designed.
Right.
And this is the price tag for doing all the detailed engineering work and also helping us through the bid process.
So not to get off topic, but looking at the schedule, we're looking going out into August of '23 until this is completed.
Correct.
Okay. All right, any questions from the council regarding this proposal to design, engineer, and I guess prepare the RFP or the
Yeah,
bidding documents?
Right.
Okay. Very good.
I have 2 questions, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
First, and if you don't have an answer to this, I totally understand, because I know we're not even in the planning phase yet, but is there a general sense of the aggregate cost for the entire project, not just the planning phase, but the actual project itself?
There is, let me see if I can,
And is that a number
mine.
that we want to say in public before it goes out to bid?
That's-
That's going to be my question. I don't think we should say that number.
Okay, then I'll leave it at that then.
Okay.
So as long, we have a,
fine,
okay.
Speak to him privately about that
certainly.
number.
All right, I
Thank you.
certainly will, thank you. And then the second question had to do with something that you'd also mentioned in your departmental report, but I know it says that the city intends to fund the construction of this project through ARPA funds, but I guess the question is, and I know you mentioned that there were a number of projects which had been identified as falling under the purview of ARPA. So I guess my question is, do we have to have any kind of specific approval in order to ensure that the funds that we see could be applied, can be applied?
The ARPA is spend the money how you believe it's going to fit, keep all your documentation, and be prepared to prove it if they come back and ask, is essentially what it is. It's,
Okay.
the guidance is jello enough, somewhat firm, but still a little bit movable, that pretty much the guidance is saying, keep all your documentation, be prepared to defend yourselves.
I just wanted to make sure that, like, we didn't say, okay, we're gonna do X, and then we proceed to do X, and halfway through, we can't use funding from ARPA in order to finance X.
And we're not getting pre-approval. They don't provide any pre-approval. The good news is between Councilwoman Foster, Mr. Weeprick, they're becoming extremely familiar with the ARPA, and I think they're doing pretty well at being able to provide that sort of guidance on it.
And so I guess then the one follow-up question to that is, and anybody can address this with me at any place and time you think is appropriate, is what we've received for ARPA enough to encompass this project? And again, if you do
Yes.
not, okay. All right, that's my questions, thank you.
Yes. Any other input on those questions, Mr. Weeprick?
No, we'll take this offline, yep.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you thank you.
All right. Any other questions more specifically about the proposal in front of us from CDM Smith on preparing this project for the bidding process? So I see from the graphic that it does include the Broad Street portion as well, the phase two, as you referred to it earlier. Okay.
Correct.
In terms of construction, will that be two separate phases, or is it all going to encompass in one project?
I think we expect to see it all while the contractor is mobilized, but beginning with the Roberts Mill Road section and working, I guess, in a linear fashion for each of the components.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if, I don't think we've really talked in detail about that.
Okay.
There is a component in the scope of the design that talks about construction sequencing. So I would say, especially with regard to the utilities, you know, we would design it and we would direct the contractors to progress in the way that made most sense for the project. So whether that would start on one end or the other, or it may come into traffic, maintenance of traffic flow. So that's something to be figured, but I wouldn't assume that it's two separate phases at this
Okay.
point.
I didn't know if you were going to ask in the bid for phase one, phase two, or both at the same time.
There really was no phasing
Okay.
written into our.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Last chance to the council. Any additional questions on this? With none, that will be up for your approval Monday evening. Lastly, once again, I'll open up to the public if they have any comment on items we have discussed this evening on the agenda. All right. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn until Monday evening.
So moved.
Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Very good. We have a motion from Councilwoman Fuller, second from Councilwoman Foster. All in favor of adjourning, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. Have a great night.